follow the order to at least get out of the street, you will be arrested. And it appears that the folks who did the damage tonight are long gone. And as we heard from Captain Cook, then many others have dispersed and others have gone into Pioneer Courthouse Square to continue more peaceful protests. But as we look at the many comments, and for those of you who've been watching, as we have all night on Facebook, we've been streaming this. You know, look, everyone respects people's right to protest peacefully. What happened late tonight, there's no other way to put it. It went off the rails. There was nothing peaceful about it. There was nothing understandable about it. Regardless of how you feel about the election, this is not what anyone wants to see. The destruction of our city.
Phone holder for it.
Really to make everyone just sort of go to their stomach. Where we are tonight is police did finally move in late tonight. And this will be a question that will be getting a lot of discussion over the next days. Where were the police tonight? We had situations early on this evening where there were motorists who were trapped, felt threatened. One woman had her windshield destroyed. Actually, we are joined now on the phone by Sergeant Pete Simpson with the Portland Police Bureau. Pete, can you hear me?
I can.
Pete, it's been a difficult night for an awful lot of people, and I know that you have an awful lot going on here.
Hey guys, this is the anti-Trump protest turns into a riot. Everyone there, they're giving a little bit of a chance. Everyone there is going to get arrested.
Every protester is getting arrested. This is in Portland.
This is in Portland, Oregon, yeah.
Well, there's always a shifting of strategy depending on the dynamics of the event.
This is breaking news.
Yeah. You know, certainly right after the election, clearly we recognize there's a lot of people that are highly emotional, and it was one of those events that is going to draw a lot of people out. A great number of folks that were out last night and tonight were peaceful. They were marching in the streets. They, wanted the bridges and things, which is, and we've made it clear that's illegal. But aside from that action, they were not committing crimes. They were not damaging property. They were not threatening people. What you saw tonight was anarchist individuals who we've dealt with, many of them in the past, insert themselves into these larger crowds because they can hide. And they began damaging property. They began attacking drivers in their cars. Fortunately, no injuries. That is the challenge we deal with in these large events. We think of around 4,000 people tonight were in the crowd at its peak. That's simply too large of a crowd for us to go in and grab somebody to arrest them. Crowd dynamics are a funny thing, and while you would hope that people in the crowd would know that that person we're arresting threw rocks or that person broke windows, it just doesn't work out that way. And it puts officers at risk, and it puts the entire event at risk of becoming a violent encounter versus a mostly peaceful event.
The police strategy tonight, Sergeant Simpson with us tonight.
It's at Portland, Oregon.
Officials, is this a mayor's decision? Is this something that...
This is live on Channel 8.
Yeah, live on Channel 8, KGW8.
Well, it comes from a lot of different things. I mean, we certainly, talk with our police commissioner and mayor about a lot of these events and have conversations. It also comes from our experiences. It comes from how we've handled previous events where it's gone badly when we show up too early and police involve themselves with crowds, and we have a lot of...
Yeah, they've been breaking windows, and
an important thing for us to pay attention to.
It literally turned from a Trump protest to a riot, and it went on to breaking news.
It wasn't even a Trump
the right answer or the best answer, and it's frustrating.
Yeah, it went from a black rights to a gay protest to black to all these other ones like
peaceful protests.
They say peaceful protest, and it turned into an anarchy protest,
and now it's a riot.
And now it's a riot. Damage tonight for sure. What we haven't had are reports of people being attacked and people being injured.
Right. Well, there was some of that going on late in the evening, and I know there were people who were wondering why officers were not responding, at least, because there were several instances where people had windshields broken. There were situations with drivers who were trapped in their cars, and I guess again, were these areas the police couldn't get to, or why did you not respond to those?
Well, some of it is, again, really the biggest factor has to do with the size of the crowd and access to those areas. It's difficult to send, I mean, how many officers do you send into a crowd for one of those events without having the entire crowd turn on the police, which we've seen happen here, we've seen it happen in other cities. It is a balance, and it's a tough one, and sometimes you look back and say we could have done it better, we could have done this differently, you know, but we have to make decisions based on the best information we have and our ability to respond and not to make things worse. And there have been times where we've shown up and things have turned worse because of our presence. We know that we sometimes can be the flashpoint. So we continually evaluate. We're continuing to evaluate right now, and we'll look at this again tomorrow. And, you know, our hope would be that the group of people that's been out there, this is mostly adults, that going forward, people who really do want to have a protest peacefully will understand that they need to take great control of their folks and maybe reconsider how they do things, because the anarchists thrive on the anonymity of these large crowds that take to the streets.
Were you aware of the folks who had been trapped in their vehicles, Sergeant? Were police getting calls about this?
We did get at least one call, or a couple calls from the Hawthorne, and then on the east side, but it was well after we were already aware of it through the live news coverage. And we were closely monitoring it to make sure, you know, people weren't being attacked physically, you know, and trying to decide how could we get in there, could we get in there at all. And we eventually had contact with those folks afterwards and took reports from people after things had settled down in that particular area.
Right. So when we saw the damage start to happen to some of these car dealerships along Broadway, I know the Kia dealership here, we're going to show some of our viewers, and also the Toyota dealerships. Was this not a scene where you send in 5, 6, and again, I apologize for asking you these questions, Sergeant, because people want to know, but I don't have the police expertise you do. Why not send 5 or 6 cruisers in there, lights and sirens, and bust this up?
Well, it's, you know, 5 or 6 cars or even a dozen officers against a crowd of hundreds and in that particular area, or thousands overall, is just, it's ill-fated. It's not a wise decision to send officers in there that could be attacked, could be injured, could create a situation where innocent people in the area get assaulted or get hurt in the process from others who are trying to create a fight with the police. And again, we're looking at, is it property or people that's being damaged? And that's an important distinction we look at.
Right, and I certainly don't want you to think that I'm second guessing what you did, because clearly we all have respect for the job that police do, and it's very difficult. At the same time, I have to wonder if a crowd of 3,000 or 4,000 people is too big for the police to respond. What is a community supposed to do when a gang of 3,000 or 4,000 is destroying downtown?
Well, it's fortunately it's a problem we don't face very often, but it is, you know, a simple math issue that it's a reality. In the entire city of Portland, we have 880 officers, and certainly they're not all working at the same time. That said, we have other officers helping us from the state police and from the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office to address some of these events that fortunately don't happen very often. You know, there is an important point I want to make about some of the crowd. There are people in that crowd that we've been in communication with at this late hour who want nothing to do with the anarchists. They have tried to stop those folks. Some of our folks that we know from Black Lives Matter and other events, they have been very vocal about trying to get those folks to stop doing what they're doing. They're not cooperating with them either. And so we understand there is a distinction. We know that, and that is factored into our ability and our decisions on whether or not to go in there and try to arrest everybody.
Well, we can see here now they're trying to cut down the American flag at Pioneer Courthouse Square, and there are demonstrators now climbing on the roof of the Starbucks. Sergeant, I do want to make clear one thing, because I think it is an important distinction, and you touched on it a minute ago. I noticed it a couple of nights ago. It wasn't broadcast necessarily by police, but I thought, this is interesting. Police are not showing up in riot gear. There hasn't been this flashpoint that you mentioned. I think this new strategy, in hindsight, might be looked at favorably, and I think in many instances would be considered laudable. However, I think what happened was there were stray protesters who were large in size, who took advantage of that strategy, and tonight we saw the result of it.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And to make it as simple as possible. Sometimes you're darned if you do and you're darned if you don't. And it's a very, very difficult thing we have to do, is try to figure out what's the best way to respond to protests. And it's been a well broadcast. There's times when we've shown up and have been roundly criticized for having officers there to protest in riot gear, and it's not lost on us. And it plays a role in our decision making and what's the right way to handle an event and the safest way to handle an event, and balance the rights of folks to express their constitutional rights, but at the same time protecting the community. And there is no hard line there. As much as people on Twitter have told us what we need to do tonight with people, there is no hard line. It is constantly moving.
Well, I do think that the police bureau should be commended for trying a new strategy. And again, I think I'm not sharing anything too personal here, where I thought it was an interesting strategy. And it worked the first two nights, because in many of these previous protests, we see folks who are being peaceful, and when police show up in riot gear, it ratchets everything up. There's confrontation, there's tear gas, and now it's out of control. We didn't have that over the first two nights. And again, I think in the police bureau's defense, tonight we didn't have that until it was too late and the anarchists had taken over. On the numbers question, Sergeant Simpson with the Portland Police Bureau with us tonight, is there or was there a point tonight, was there any consideration of calling the National Guard? Several have asked about that. This is a crowd that's too large and too unruly for Portland police, then what?
No, there was no consideration of that, and I don't know that that's something we would look at, simply from the standpoint that we deal with crowd dynamics on a much more regular basis, and our people at the National Guard, we have National Guard folks in our police bureau. They train on it. We've trained with them, but it's not something they do with regularity. We have a very, very clear set of rules and guidelines that govern how we do business, that applies to us as police officers and Portland police officers. When we bring in folks from outside that aren't familiar with those things, it can potentially create a problem, and it's just not something tonight we're looking at, and I don't know if we'll look at that in the future. It may not be the right fit for what we do in Portland. What's the plan for the rest of the evening, Sergeant? It probably still evolving. I mean, it really depends on what's going on with the crowd. I'm kind of watching things as I talk to you, and it looks like the crowd's moved back to Pioneer Square, or they're a good segment of them. It looks like we're making some arrests. I can't tell for sure. We'll check on that over in the North Park Blocks area. But we hope that folks that came out tonight to have their voices heard feel like they did, and maybe they recognize that tonight's done. Tonight we've accomplished something, and a lot of things happened that we didn't want to happen. Let's call it a night and maybe rethink how going forward the best way to express our thoughts is.
When police did show up and in force and drew the line not to allow these protesters to get on the interstate, was that part of the strategy this evening, Sergeant?
Well, we definitely did not want people on the freeways, and fortunately that didn't happen this evening, or they haven't attempted to do it yet. That presents a real safety issue for drivers as well as people getting on the freeways. This crowd, at least some of this crowd, had different ideas. It's hard to break windows on the freeway when there aren't any businesses, so it's hard to know what their plans were within the group, the anarchist side of things, and we constantly are going to be adjusting to what they're doing and their tactics and what we see going on in other cities, because these folks who protest regularly, and I don't want to call them professional protesters because I don't think it comes with pay and benefits, but folks that are regularly out protesting, they're talking to fellow protesters in other cities, and they're adjusting their tactics and they're adopting things they see that work in other places. So they pay attention to that, and so do we.
I know we've been watching these, and it's a good point, Sergeant, that this is not exclusive to Portland. We've been seeing protests like this across the nation over the last 2 nights, from New York to Chicago to Denver to Austin, Texas to Seattle to Portland. It's certainly not just here, although I think, as you point out, there was clearly a different agenda among some of these protesters in Portland tonight to do the damage they did. Sergeant, before we let you go, tomorrow night the Blazers are scheduled to play at Moda Center. Is there any early indication that we may have more protests tomorrow night?
I don't know what information we have yet on tomorrow. We'll certainly be looking at that, and we're aware the Blazers will be at home. We have officers that are assigned and always working at those games, so we'll be making sure that we have resources available, and we've been in communication with the Trailblazer organization and the Moda Center, discussing safety concerns. But at this point, we have no information anybody's going to be going there to protest or do anything, but we'll keep up on that.
All right. Sergeant, I really appreciate the time, and I appreciate you answering all of these questions. I think you've really, shared a lot of interesting and important information for folks tonight. It is a difficult position for you to be in. You are sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't. I know it was a difficult spot for officers to be in. When they did show up tonight, it certainly did help keep the protesters off of the freeway, and I'm sure that we'll be hearing much more about the police response and the police strategy moving forward. Sergeant Pete Simpson, thank you again for your time.
You bet. Take care.
So there's Sergeant Simpson, and again, I think, in the end, there will still be the question, where were police tonight? And I think it's a fair question. Certainly when you have a situation like this, there's also those who understand that, look, we don't want to send officers into a situation where they're going to be putting themselves in danger, where they're outnumbered, hundreds to one potentially in certain situations. But what you're seeing now on the left side of your screen are the protesters who have gathered tonight at Pioneer Courthouse Square. You can see actually off to the right there is the big black tarp, is where they put the Portland Christmas tree up today, or started to, so you can see it on the right side there. Where the protest began tonight at 5 o'clock is where it is wrapping up. And frankly, on the right, I believe, is where we've seen police arrest those few who were arrested tonight in the park blocks and in the Pearl District. Let's check back with KGW's Mike Benner. Mike?
Yeah, hey there, Joe. I'm on the edge of the square right by the Nordstrom entrance to the mall there. And it seems that some protesters want to move back into the streets here. So there are a few that have moved into the street just beyond this crowd holding up signs, but then some have stayed back here at the corner. So actually it looks like now they are going to march through at least one lane of traffic here and get on the move again. But, you've done a great job back there, Joe, kind of walking our viewers through what's going on. So for those folks who are still, or just joining us rather, this started at 5 o'clock with a peaceful protest at the square, and then protesters moved across the Hawthorne Bridge, where we saw our first incident involving a driver who allegedly got out of her car and proceeded to try to throw some sort of liquid substance on the protesters, who then detained her and de-escalated the situation. And then we saw a driver surrounded by protesters, her car damaged on Grand, and then again, can't highlight it enough, the wild scene that we witnessed in the Pearl. But again, it's important to note that was anarchists, and that this was no longer at that point a Don't Shoot Portland, Black Lives Matter protest. It was taken over by anarchists. I think we're showing some video right now of the scene there. Just a wild scene, masked protesters, basically destroying any window they came across. And it was very, very unsettling to see some of these store employees inside these closed down stores, as they had their windows just bashed out by these protesters. And also worth mentioning again, just our crew came under attack briefly. Someone tried to take a baseball bat, or not tried to, did take a baseball bat to the back of our equipment. Fortunately, the equipment made it out okay, but from that point on, we actually had a couple protesters who followed us around for our own safety. It's a very unique crowd out here. Again, you have two groups. You have anarchists and you have the peaceful protesters who are Don't Shoot Portland, Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ, you name it. But that's those anarchists that are causing all the problems tonight. I'll send it back to you, Joe.
It was certainly an interesting dynamic tonight, I know, because as you point out, were it not for those protesters who were on the peaceful side to begin with, many of them stepped in to stop some of the rioting and some of the destruction that was going on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I'm glad you're looking live now at another huge group of protesters meeting the group that we're walking with. So, you know, officers urge them to return to the square and assemble peacefully, but they've taken the streets over once again.
Mike, remind those folks who are watching here to get us oriented. Where exactly are you now?
We're on Broadway and Taylor, right outside the Hilton and Columbia Sportswear. And so now we are moving, I believe it'll be southbound on Southwest Broadway. I'm going to try to just make a guess at how many people I'm looking at now. I'm saying easily 400 or 500 people out here, if not more. So while officers from the Portland Police Bureau look to have de-escalated the situation about an hour ago, it looks like these protesters are not giving up. I'm trying to scan the crowd here. I don't see too many protesters with masks. This could be the group that's more peaceful, but then again, the anarchists join in. What they do, their motive, is to use this crowd, a huge crowd of thousands, as Sergeant Pete Simpson pointed out. They use this crowd basically to conceal themselves, to hide, and they will jump out at certain points, break windows, break trash cans, break whatever they see. We've seen them take out power boxes. We've seen it all tonight. And then they jump back in, so no one really sees them. They're, of course, in masks, very bold. I mean, I've mentioned that it was wild to see in years past, months past, that they avoid the cameras. They don't want anything to do with the cameras. Tonight, they were showing off for the cameras. They were breaking things right in front of our cameras. They didn't care. They were doing it right in front of surveillance cameras.
All right, Mike, thank you very much. We're gonna let you get back to covering the protest here. We want to thank those of you who've been watching on Portland CW for this extended coverage of the anti-Trump protest that turned very violent and a lot of damage in downtown Portland tonight. For those of you on KGW, we will return you to the blacklist now, and we will see you with more at the top of the hour.